You mentioned that leadership has evolved over all of these years. It's so much more complex now. Who do you need to be a successful, influential leader today?
Oh, that's a challenging question. I would say the first thing you have to know is that a leader is not the same as a boss. And I remember speaking in Saskatchewan a few years ago about that, is we have far too many bosses and we call them leaders and they're not. I'm not saying we don't need both, but a leader, in my view, is somebody that people choose to follow, not are told, well, that's your boss and you have no option. They choose to follow when they have options. Why they choose to follow somebody is because that individual espouses certain values, beliefs, experience, whatever it might be that resonates with them. But I think a leader is somebody who is willing to take risks, calculated risks, not just kind of off the wall, understands the importance of relationships, and is oftentimes I say, a leader is somebody who tries to find out what it is people need to do their job really well, then focuses on getting them that stuff and then getting out of the way and let them do the job.
Right. Which is hard for some leaders,
Oh, it is, absolutely. Yeah. It's letting go, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Was that a challenge for you ever?
I'm not sure it was, because I remember when I first went to the government of Alberta, they had a great management development program that pretty much anything you wanted to take, you could get through them. And I did that Situational Leadership. Hersey and Blanchard wrote a great book on it. And understanding that the type of leader you need to be in particular situations. And so I think over the years, I've learned, when you need to step back, you have to step back and let people do their own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you were going into your leadership positions, did you ever feel like, something called the Imposter Syndrome, where you don't feel as qualified, or you question yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is when I say that, my career planning has been serendipitous, to say the least. I mean, there were some positions that I took on. I'd say, well, how in God's name did I get this? Because I'm not sure. I think inside, I think maybe I can do it, but I've not got, how people are assessing me is not the way I'm internally looking at myself. So I think I've faced that a fair bit over my life. I actually don't view it as I think sometimes I second guess myself too much, but I think it's having a healthy degree of self-confidence is important, but not so much that you can't read the tea leaves, so to speak.
Right. The ego needs to be in check. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And how did you find out about your own strengths, your own weaknesses, and be able to evaluate yourself more, like your friends or the other people perceive you versus your inner critic?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One, you have to be open for receiving feedback. And I don't just mean hearing it, you actually have to listen to what's being said. I've often said that there's some people I know who, they're hearing what you're saying, but it's actually not going in. It's stopping at the ear and then going back out. And I think, having a good sense of your own, of who you really are. I say it's important that I'm able to look at myself in the mirror, and I have some things that are critically important to me. As I said, things like learning, things like making a contribution, things like integrity. I mean, honesty. These are my own personal values. I have to be able to look at myself in the mirror and say, how do I fit up against those things? I don't have to share that necessarily with anybody, but I've said to people, if you can't be honest with yourself, you'll never be honest with anybody else. So for me, it's meant, as I said, sometimes I get overly critical, but it's been, I don't think anybody knows themselves as well as themselves.
Yourself, right?
And if you can't incorporate that into your planning for the future, I think you're not well served by yourself. I'm not saying you need to be overly. You shouldn't be overly critical, but at the same time, I think you have to say, this is what I'm like. This is what my strengths are, and how do I actually build on those?
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote, and you probably know of it, where it goes along the lines of leadership is a journey of really getting to know yourself.
It is, very much so, very much so.
Yeah. And you've worked with so many, amazing leaders, and maybe some leaders who you've learned some lessons of not doing the kinds of things they've done. I'm curious if there's a particular behavior or a trait that, that doesn't serve leaders well.
There are probably two. One is not listening. And I think you can say all the right words, but if you're not listening, I think there's a huge disconnect. You're not open to really seeing how other people see you, which I think is particularly in healthcare, where I said relationships are so important. If you don't really understand how you're being perceived and what your how other people view your relationships, I think is critical. I would say the other is more of a when people take it a real top down thing, I am the boss here and thou shalt do what I say. I might make some perfunctory statements about really involving people, but I don't mean them, and it's that artificial stuff that comes up that I think is a real turnoff for people. If you don't really care about what people think, then I think that comes across pretty quickly, irrespective of all your feelings that you might be doing everything wonderfully.